All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back from lunch. Hopefully I won't bore you too badly here. I'll be the one falling asleep. I literally just got back in from India on an investigation that took place. I had 5 days to make it over to India and get back and finish the investigation and then get to here. So even though I was around as of late Wednesday, I'm still a bit jet lagged. I've got some friends over here who will basically laugh at me when I fall asleep during my own presentation. Well, we'll see how it goes. What I'm going to talk to you about is something pretty much along the lines of a near and dear topic to me, which is cybercrime investigations, especially international ones. And really one of the things that I see impacting them more than almost anything else that takes place, and that is data management, or sometimes the lack of. And almost in every case except for one, that data management has been completely inadvertent. No one meant it to work that way, it just did. First of all, since I do work with lawyers all the time, I have a disclaimer. Now, I mean, as obviously as it says, I'm not responsible for anything, my company's not responsible for anything. I don't know what I'm talking about right now, so don't hold me to blame. And since you probably don't know it, there is a mandatory requirement for most disclaimers, has to be at least a 7-point font. Took care of that as well. What we're looking at are the interest in the transnational laws on the internet. This is how many there are. Absolutely none. Lots of little piecemeal stuff here or there. We tend to get along a little bit with Europe. We're not too good about getting along with Asia. I don't know why. Over in Europe, they have all sorts of interesting things. Of course, the EU, one big happy family until you actually get them together, and then they can't agree on almost anything. But what happens here is you have now a complete lack of transnational laws that can be applied to almost any case that you have on an international investigation. I mean, why should you be concerned? Well, heck, you're on the internet. You're now part of an international community where your data can transfer pretty much anywhere, or whether you want it to or not at times, and you may or may not have any legal recourse at all. Most of the time, you do not. What I'm going to do with this is kind of look at some of the observations I picked up along the way of how this kind of works and how you can apply some of what I've learned, hopefully, to think about when looking at how you manage your security and how you manage your data, actually. Before I get into anything, I'm going to kind of explain a little bit of how I see laws starting to work their way about the internet. And it may not seem completely relevant at first, but these are the global transportation routes. This is the system. The vast majority of laws that have taken place between nations have been developed not just for peacetime and how to handle diplomatic relationships, but most of it's been based on trade. Those trades have followed these routes. And because of that, you have an awful lot of the jurisdictions and laws that have popped up over hundreds and sometimes thousands of years of trading have all been developed based on movement of goods and products over these routes in between countries and jurisdictions. Strangely enough, when you look at some of the so-called internet mapping capabilities, a lot of what you see here kind of mirrors what you see in the international trading routes. The difference is it may not be a direct thing. Unlike a flight like I just took that took off from here, landed me over in India, eventually. Your data, may go through hundreds of servers, depending on the complication of the route to go and make the same type of movement. But the reason why this is important is a lot of the current look at the law by attorneys and by politicians are trying to mirror what took place when they developed transportation and trading route laws and regulations and applying those to the internet. Now, it'd be nice if there was nice orderly movement over the internet and you could regulate that movement and follow it and track it and have no problems. Somehow that doesn't quite work, and that type of additional level of information and knowledge is not quite getting translated to the politicians. But in spite of that, the world is moving on, businesses are still doing business, and at times you have to deal with some of the issues that pop up. Now, the whole idea of no geographic laws or disparate geographic laws, jurisdictions not helping each other, business not working. A few groups out there have already taken notice of this and are actually doing quite well. In the malware world, the whole idea of ransomware has now come along recently, and unlike in the past where it would be maybe one language poorly written and not working very well, or having some sort of pay service that could have the local authorities, if by chance you did give some sort of credit card information out there to unlock your computer, could easily be interrupted and stopped. You know, call up Amex, say, hey, by the way, you know, I was dumb, I gave my credit card information to here, rescind that transaction. What they've done is they've gone into different languages. They actually check geolocate your IP. They look at your language on your keyboards. They look at a whole bunch of other things. They kind of figure out where you are, what language you speak, and they pop up the appropriate announcement for you. And almost all the pay services they provide now are those great little cards that you can buy in gas stations, where you can no longer go rescind that. You know, you take that. They have electronic transfer capabilities, and depending on the pay card, on where you're at and what they're doing, that's how they can get their money, and you have no choice in the matter. Nice business model. It's nice, it's geographically aware, works very, very well. Oh, by the way, two of the main ones that you see here are PaySafe, I love that one, and Ucash. Now, both of these are internet-based businesses. They do supply the little cash cards, and they're also in locations that if you ever did try and go after them, the laws don't apply there. Good luck trying to go and sue and get anything out of this. And if there was a way to get to it, by now, one of the governments or one of the law enforcement agencies will have shut this down. Look at another geographically aware construct. A little thing called Conficker that came out a few years back. You know, it had a slight geographic impact around the world, installed itself on a few systems here or there, created kind of an uproar and caused quite some problems. A lot of it was looking at trying to steal banking information, among many other things. Interesting part about that was it is believed quite widely that Conficker originated in the Ukraine. We can kind of zoom in here a little bit on Europe, and excuse me for walking away from the mic. Ukraine's right there. The original version of Conficker did the same thing that the ransomware did. It checked your keyboard language. If it saw Ukrainian, it would not install. It's, you know, as an additional check, it would check your IP address and see, is this in the block of known Ukrainian IPs? If it found that, it would not install. Now, why would they do this? The Ukraine has this wonderful set of laws that says you can't hack anyone in the Ukraine, that is, or businesses in the Ukraine, but only businesses in the Ukraine or individuals in the Ukraine. Therefore, these people go, okay, I don't really want to mess around with anyone in my backyard. I don't need people showing up to me and putting me in some sort of jail that I really don't want to spend time in. So I hack everyone else instead. Since then, of course, Conficker got out, you know, it got changed. There eventually were a few things that got installed in the Ukraine, but hopefully the people that originally came up with that were able to point to someone else and say, hey, we didn't do that, we were good. Ukraine's an interesting spot because it's also widely accused by many governments of being a large haven for cybercrime for this very reason. You go in there, they have pretty much their own version of Silicon Valley in one area of the Ukraine that is supposedly related to nothing but malware and cybercrime. That's not cybercrime, it's called business, people. You're in a business war. This is not people hacking you. This is a business stealing your stuff legally in their jurisdiction. Just like you do work here legally in your jurisdiction that someone else may not like somewhere else, well, as long as you're not impacting them too much, too bad. You know, you're not breaking any laws here in the US. You're not breaking any laws in the Ukraine. Now, the argument I get all the time when I talk about this is, but what about Microsoft? Here's a company that gets this great international cooperation, goes around to all these locations, shuts down servers left and right. They are taking down more botnets than anyone else. They get this huge international presence. They never have any problems. Why is that? Way back in the good old days of the internet, 1990s there, I can't remember who the original company was that had the DNS stuff. It became VeriSign and worked its way on through. When that took place, the Department of Justice had a special agreement that said any domain, no matter where it's at, that ends in .com, .net, cctv, .name, is something that we control and we can seize, period. Sir? It got, as time went along, it kept on incorporating more in that, it went to the domain name registry stuff. Currently, the only thing they cannot reach is a foreign domain registry service that will do, like, say, something in the local, yeah. Yeah, so, I mean, at that point, you can't touch it. At least the US cannot touch it without a mutual lateral assistance treaty and complete cooperation from the authorities overseas. Yeah, that did go in there. I didn't add in .org.edu. There are variants of that here in the US that are also part of this agreement, not through VeriSign, but through another one there. But it doesn't matter. The bottom line is, and now ICE from the Department of Homeland Security controls this. If they want you to have your system go away or have anybody's system seized, no matter where it is in the world, no matter who owns it, they can go to a federal judge with a warrant and get that domain taken away, and Microsoft would then go help take over. Sir? It is, but right. But at the same time, that is one of the ones that has been mentioned. It's on their list according to ICE. Now I don't know how. Maybe they have a mutual auto assistance treaty with them, but according to ICE, they can seize it. Yeah. Now, the one impact of this is here we are looking at trying to make international laws and cooperation and being nice and being friendly. Small problem when all these other jurisdictions are finding computers being seized in their, by companies that own them in their area by the US with no input on their own. To say that we're not going to have any international laws being drafted up and everyone agreeing upon them in the next few days is probably a safe bet. Probably in the next few years. It's a very safe bet. Now, when you start looking at the problem, and especially what I do for investigations and what any company does, is I worry about where my data is at. Just like everyone here should be worried about where their data is at inside their company or their own personal data. Now, the concerns that you have when you start looking at this from a legal aspect is I need to know the geographic location of all the systems that support, process, store, and back up your data. When I come rolling into some place to do an investigation, I'm going to start doing my own data mapping. And I have to understand where everything potentially is at, so I know then when I start dealing with attorneys and the company itself on what type of extra resources I'm going to need. Because I can guarantee you almost every investigation I've ever walked into, the data is not where these companies think it is. And when it involves international or even multi-jurisdictional here in the US concerns, I can guarantee you that unless they set up cooperation ahead of time, it doesn't come quickly. I mean, I have literally sat on the ground in a hotel for 3 weeks as attorneys argued out something before I could collect even one computer in some locations. Of course, I'm billing, I'm in a hotel. It's not a bad life at times. At other times, I have to get this job done and get going. And if I'm being held up here, no one's happy at all. In addition, a few other concerns that you should have that I have to be concerned about, not just what you have under control, but how many subcontractors out there have it? How many third parties beyond that they work with have your data? Any type of encryption transmission standards. There's all sorts of import-export requirements. I can check a lot of stuff around the world with where I go, but there's some jurisdictions that I wander into. I'm not allowed to wander in there with some of the encryption stuff I have because it's against the, it's against the law. I can't put it on their systems out there. I can keep it on mine, but I can't put it on someone else's system out there to encrypt something and bring it in. Licensing requirements, one that I always hate, but I try and remember here. License requirements is another area that have geographic restrictions on them. You have to check that as well. Then there's what we heard earlier about the data breach liabilities. I know here in the US obviously there are 50 states. I believe there's 41 different rule sets for states on what the data breach requirements are. And there are also a couple law firms that have very, very large involved spreadsheets that will tell you all the differences between the two. I've actually read them, and I still don't understand them. And I do this for a living. That's what, I mean, when I start, I learned one thing long ago: lawyers can parse that language far better than I can. A few more concerns. What are your litigation hold procedures for every jurisdiction you're in? I need to know that. What are the e-discovery procedures? They're different. For example, just in Pennsylvania alone, they have certain laws that basically will bar certain types of e-discovery that, say, here in Virginia, not a problem at all. So just even working here in the US, I encounter differences all the time. I head overseas and it's a very different matter. And you can read the rest of these. I'm not going to get into that. You can look at that. If you're interested, you can read those on the different slides as well. A few other things I just want to, here's a few other things for you to look at here. But one of the things I want you to take away from this is everything I've been talking about so far seems to be US-based. Okay, I'm inside the US, I'm safe. My data is protected. You know, the government has my back. They're not going to give my stuff away, and they're not going to give my stuff away without telling me. If you want to, in your favorite search engine, type in Rackspace 2004 Indie Media. Government gave up a whole bunch of data to the Italian government on a request without telling anyone on a legal case. Confiscated the whole thing, sent it on over. Rackspace was just the hosting facility for Indie Media. This is all about a case where they had someone that, a reporter had said something about an organization over in Italy. They didn't like it, and so they managed to get the entire thing seized and sent over there for copies. And that's not the only one that's ever happened. It's just a quick and easy reference point for you all. Well, what would any good business do when faced with the fact that you have multiple jurisdiction problems? You really have to have your data under control. You have to know what you're doing. You have to be legally ready. You have to look at all your possible requirements that you have out there. Of course, you send your data to the cloud. I love this. I love you guys that do this. You make my life easier because for two things. First of all, A, in the cloud, I can mostly find your data a whole lot faster. B, the problem is so can everyone else. Now, this is kind of like, I show this to attorneys all the time, so please forgive me. It's a little bit different analogy. You have to be kind of slow with them. To me, I tell them this is data at rest in the cloud. It's a Korean ship that's registered in Germany. That's actually in a dock in Germany right now, and has cargo from probably about 100 different countries on it. Kind of what your data looks like in a data center or mixed in with the cloud. Of course, you know, that's data at rest in some sort of steady state. As soon as things start moving in there, you have all sorts of issues. I truly also enjoy the cloud providers that tell me, don't worry, we can track where your data is located. Yeah. What they don't understand is that many jurisdictions, including the US, are looking at the whole concept of data at rest and deciding what does at rest mean. At rest currently is looking at things such as it is currently sitting in RAM while the CPU accesses it. That at rest is a fraction of a second. And the data itself may live in another jurisdiction completely, but if I have a third party way down the road who has a CPU that is scheduled to access that data legally, I have a road in. The US has done this. The FBI has done this. They continue to do this. This is the rules that we deal with. Other organizations outside the US have similar rules. This is where this is why, of course, since we don't cooperate, none of the laws get along, this is why some issues pop up. So if you think your data is safe because it's sitting somewhere, not just because it's being part of an official subpoena or request to the government, if there's a CPU that they can find attached to a business in their country that has a legal right to it, no matter where your data is at, they'll find a way. If you are going to use the cloud or any third-party data center provider of any type, a few things for you to look at here. I can guarantee you the service level agreements you have at every major provider include almost none of these issues that you're going to see here. I have to know these anyway because I have to ask the questions. I have to come in, ask them, where's your data at? Okay, what cloud provider are you using? Where are their servers at? Where are their backups at? When they move data, if they move data, what happened to the copies after they moved it? How many CPUs and where were the CPUs at when they accessed it? Because I have to answer all those same questions, because when I go and try and map out where your data's at and explain to the lawyers, here are the potential problems we have with this case that you should be aware of, that you can then articulate to a judge who has very little idea how any of this stuff works. This kind of makes it fun. So, I mean, you go through here all the different things that would be nice to know. You should have these all lined up as part of your service level agreements if you're going to go into any place too. In particular, there are the one here, the third one down, provisions in the event of a dispute with the cloud company. Many of the service level agreements that you have them, give them, the right to hold your data hostage. You don't own it, you don't possess it until you work out the agreement. That's kind of a real bummer when you talk to someone in a company and go, oh, by the way, yeah, that data you have up there, they're holding it, and you can't do anything about it because what you signed up for gave them the right of mediation under their terms, not yours. Now, of course, the greatest threat out there, everyone knows right now, is the APT. I mean, there's all sorts of other ghoulies, ghosties, and long-legged beasties out there, but the APT is the threat of choice right now. Unfortunately, back 10 years ago, the term APT was a wonderful term used by the Air Force, used internally with them, used with other members of the military. In my background, I worked with the Department of Defense for about 17 years. I do understand a lot of the stuff that went on, and it's about the same time I was getting out of that world, the same time the term APT came along. It meant an unclassified way of talking about a series of events that were taking place with certain hacking, with certain characteristics. Basically, hacking with certain methodologies being used. Well, everyone kind of agrees that the APT involves something where you have a threat that comes in, spends an awful lot of time in your computer systems, and potentially messes with a lot of your data. And if the APT is a useful topic to get companies talking about it, I'm all for it. But to me, the only APT that I live with is called a lawsuit. And the actors are lawyers. They have the same characteristics of any company that went any type of good litigation somewhere. They had attorneys all over their data for sometimes years. In the investigation that I did a few years back, which is still ongoing, I'll show you an example of this. The data that they have and the amounts of data that were taken for those investigations is definitely in the terabyte range, sometimes in the petabyte range, and is going off to locations, mostly in law firms, who have some of the crappiest information security in the world. So now you're giving up the true keys of your kingdom, and they're being put out into a lawyer's office somewhere that's being protected by somebody who gets paid almost nothing in a law firm, who's treated like dirt because they're not a lawyer, and who will be switching out with another guy in another 6 months. And that's your data protection. Believe me, there's a reason why I consider that the most advanced persistent threat right now. And another thing to realize is what you call hacking, most of the time those are legitimate businesses. And sometimes the law firms themselves can be constituted as hackers, depending on if they're your lawyers or the other side's lawyers and what they want to go after. Well, what can you do? Of course, technology is here to save us all. We know that. There's another box to put out. I heard a couple of speakers say, oh yeah, just throw another 1U appliance in there, we're set. We have a technology that works. It's called the off button. Shut it all down. You won't have to worry about it. Your data can't get out of the house if you can't access it. Unfortunately, this has kind of a few unwanted limitations to it. You can't get to your data yourself. The one thing that I've found that has helped company time and time again, not just in litigation but in security, is data management. There's been one investigation, this is a very large investigation, involving a retailer that has an international presence and has a series of their own data centers and enough computers that even I was sat back and was kind of impressed by it. They actually have a formal data management program. They have PhDs in data management who've come in. They can tell you down to the penny what a code change is. They can tell you where all their data is supposed to be. This is one of the few times I walked into an investigation. I had my list of questions. They had answers to almost every one of them. They weren't perfect, but they were the closest thing to that. They saved a lot of time, they saved a lot of money, and just as importantly, as far as their liability goes in court, they were able to say, we have this, which are truly the best practices of the industry, not what the industry claims are best practices. We can show you exactly what we've done to protect our data, not our networks, our data, and that this other group over here is liable because they could not meet those same requirements. That won a lot of points with the judge, and it's true. Well, how do you do data management? First of all, it's a mindset. Security is a process. It's not something that you hook up and plug in and it takes over. You got to think about it. There's no technology involved here that's going to save you. Do something about your attitude. You're in a business war. You're out there right now. You're not going to have anyone help you. The government's stepping in right now and saying, oh, don't worry, we got your back. You don't have law firms able to step up and say, we got your back. They do for a price, but then again, it's not guaranteed. And, you see, sorry for a second. With that, not just they don't have your back, but in turn, most of the time, your employees don't have your own back as well, because they are too busy, and I'm guilty of this too. I'll sit back there, I'm going, okay, gosh, I really need to do this right now. I can't get access to this section. I'm just going to put this on my thumb drive, or I'm going to CC a copy to myself from my home email. I'm going to do something like that, and I'm going to move the data out. Okay, doesn't work that way, but it should. You must, first of all, go out and classify your most important data. You got to find it. You have to know what's important to you as an organization. I mean, what's really important. The vast majority of data in an organization, to me, is cat videos. 80% of what you have on your networks are cat videos. I don't care. I don't care that you send around the joke of the day on email. I don't care that you have all these files stored here of your kid's graduation. I'm fine with that. I just want to know that stuff is not important and move along. So I need you to be able to identify that for me. If you don't identify it, I can tell you right now, there will be teams of attorneys charging you $600 an hour and more to sort that problem out for you. Next step then, get help with your legal requirements. Figure out what you can and cannot have retained. Everyone who's in a business that has any type of compliance issues with that has to have a certain amount of information retained of a certain type. Figure out what that is, plan for that accordingly, protect it. Work on what you do. You'll find out rapidly you can start saving money, because all that space you've been buying, all that disk space you've been buying, now that everyone has 20 gigs of email that they can save, and that they have 400 gig drives on their systems, and they have network access in the terabytes or petabytes to play with. You don't need that much. No business that I know of, unless you're a big data business like Google or Facebook, where you're selling that information to advertisers. You don't need it as another business. Protect what's important. Put all your best protection around what's truly important. Be willing to lose everything else. I mean that too. Be willing to lose anything that's non-essential. Get control of your data. It's already out of house. Someone has CC'd it somewhere. Someone has BCC'd it somewhere. Someone has put it up on Pastebin. Someone has put it up on GitHub. It's out there. Someone with the best intentions has put something out there. One of the worst breaches I know of was someone who pasted something up on Pastebin that involved very sensitive internal company data, because they were just going to tell their friend where to go find it, and they didn't have an easy way to transfer it where they were at the time. And of course, since they put it up there and just told their friend about it, no one else would ever know. No one else could ever find it. There's a reason why those paste sites are being used right now by like Anonymous and a bunch of other places. Everyone knows, go there to look for stuff. I mean, I'll find most of your credit card information on there sooner or later. I'll probably find my credit card information on there sooner or later as well. Just happens. Now, not just find your data and protect it, but find out where you can protect it the most. Everyone knows here in the US you have copyright, trademark, and trade secret protection. You only have protection for two of those from the government, copyright and trademark. There's a very real reason why the RIAA and the NPAA raised so much noise about that. They actually cared to go out and define what's important to them, put the appropriate protections they felt on it, and then are willing to go out and prosecute on it. I don't always agree with that, but you know what? I give them credit. They actually did something. Trade secrets, now that's something you have to do in the civil court. There's no government help for those, period. Not in the United States. Other countries, yes. US, no. There it's all civil things. There's no trade secret repository. There's no place you can register your stuff. I mean, I've always wanted a registry that said, okay, I don't need to know what the formula for Coca-Cola is to know that the formula for Coca-Cola is a trade secret. All I have to do is have that. I would love to have that registered somewhere so the government could go after intellectual property theft of my trade secrets with other countries. Because at least there is intellectual property, the World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO, is at least an organization set up to handle disputes between countries for intellectual property, but only stuff defined and brought forward by countries, not companies. And they can't take your trade secrets over there. That's why these so-called Chinese hacks are working so well, because if they're grabbing your trade secrets, you can't prove they're your trade secrets. You know they are, we know they are, but there's no proof of that. There's nothing that's an independent base somewhere to say that. You have almost no rights. Now, the last part, and the most important part, you want to change your culture, tie it to a person, everyone in the company. You know what? I worked in the defense world for a long time. If I made a mistake with classified data, I had real hard repercussions that were going to hit me. I saw people around me get nailed by stuff. I'm sitting there going, oh, dang. You know, I don't want that to happen because that means I'm going to lose money. And if it happens again, I lose my livelihood. Happens, you know, severely enough, I'm in jail somewhere. Those are hard repercussions. On the positive side, if I did well, I actually had little things that say, gee, you get a little bump here because you did things right. Companies should have this. They hold every one of their employees accountable. I don't care if the CEO said, oh, gee, you know, I got hit by that phishing scheme. I'm sorry I clicked on that link and I lost everything in the company. There's an impact for that. Gee, you might lose your company. If it's publicly traded, you will lose your company. It comes down to this. You've heard the word attribution a lot. Data, you must classify it. You must have established ownership. You must put that into the jurisdictions most likely to help you. You must be able to attribute what you own to you and the location it's supposed to be. So when you find it somewhere else, that whole idea of attributing or attribution of the enemy, of the person who did this to you, the hacker, the government, the whatever that did this to you, you now have a chance to establish that. If anyone read the Mandate report, and before that there's a Northrop Grumman report a couple years ago that showed the APT and the China thing, Mandiant, you know, pointed a finger at somebody known as Ugly Gorilla. I love that. That report was fantastic on up until the point they said that Ugly Gorilla is now obviously working for the Chinese military. What? I'm sorry. That's where you've lost me. That sounds great in the tech world. It sounds wonderful in the political world. In court, you have up to that person's identity, you may have him stone cold. I've been lucky in the past. I've managed to get a couple people stone cold. I knew I had their addresses, I had their pictures. I was in a jurisdiction one time, I was even allowed to take their picture with the webcam and present it to the local authorities. The problem was he was in a different jurisdiction where they weren't cooperating. And more importantly of all, even though we know he was working for what we suspect strongly he was working for a group, I couldn't prove that he was tasked by that group to do this. Without that tasking, without that additional step, I can only link it so far. That's what happens here, is give yourself the ammunition that you can try and link it as far as possible, so when something will happen, even if it's not just a hacking thing, it's just a lawsuit, because it will happen if you're a business. You will get sued sooner or later. You will be ready. Now, kind of show you how this works with the whole idea of data management in the world and why it can at times produce something well. What I have here are, A in the U.S. that was, had a case where the Department of Justice was suing a firm in the Middle East that supplied logistical support to the troops and personnel over there. Now, that's in B there. Now, C, that's Paris. Not because I got to go there, I got to spend all my time in the Middle East. I had, of course, if anyone's been to Kuwait in July and August, we can talk about our experiences. I mean, those sandstorms and 130-degree plus temperatures, always fun. My colleagues were in Paris enjoying themselves. Oh, well. Reason why this was set up the way it was, they're suing them because they said, okay, fine, part of your business practices are you are paying out these additional fees that are not allowed under the contract that we have with you. We're considering that to be semi-money laundering. At the same time, over there, having spent way too much time over there, there's a cost of doing business in a lot of foreign countries. Call it bribery, call it what you will. When I wandered into Kuwait, I found out right away if I pay a guy $100 there as an official service to get me through customs, my computers, all my equipment and everything gets through customs in an hour. Without that, I will get through customs in a couple hours. My computers and equipment will show up 3 to 4 days later, maybe. There's a cost of doing business. Their only concern when I got there, other than paying them the $100, is did I have guns? The reason why they asked me that was that's an extra $100. Like, okay, sorry, I don't have guns, can't give any more money. I'll remember that next time in case I bring something over. Now, enough of that. I mean, the guy that owns this company, very, very wealthy. We're talking about billions upon billions. He's made like the top 100 odd list in the world. Not bad. He also had dual citizenship over in the EU, technically in Switzerland, if I remember correctly. A lot of the officers in the company had EU citizenship as well. They were all covered by EU privacy laws, important thing to get back to in a minute. A lot of the company also had locations in the US. They had locations in Singapore, 2 or 3 different countries in Europe, and a couple more countries in the Middle East. And what happens is, of all those locations, in the Middle East, there are almost no privacy data laws. Anything in the US, since it's a US court requesting this, and it's to a business in the US, even though it's owned by someone overseas, that business in the US, the attorneys agreed, had to give up everything that they had locally stored. Now, no privacy laws in Kuwait. However, since the people they were interested in, especially email, because email is a big thing that gives the government or any lawyer attribution of who got it, who received it, and who sent it, then they want that. Most of those guys were in EU. They all claimed EU privacy. EU privacy rules said that if a person tells me, as an investigator, this email over here, and email is included in their privacy laws, that email is personal, I can't touch it, period. They just have to declare it to be so. They don't have to prove it to anyone, they just have to declare it to be personal. It's a great, great advantage. At the same time, they had a data center that they were working with that they had built in Singapore. Singapore is a wonderful location. It's like this great black hole of information. You can go there, information goes in, and you can make requests to the government all day long. It'll come out maybe a few years later. Now, why Paris? Paris, it turns out, France has this wonderful thing called blocking laws. Blocking laws were done specifically by countries outside the US to limit the impact of information going to US courts. They're called blocking laws for a region. You cannot have this data. We're going to block it from you. And that happened because an attorney in Paris, a long time ago in another case, actually gave up data that the EU and, well, the French thought should never have been given up. And that attorney got jailed. The rest of the country looked on, especially the rest of the attorneys looked on in that country and said, oh, heck no. And after that, they developed formal blocking laws. So what happened here is this guy set up this wonderful thing. As an investigator, I couldn't stay here in the US and grab any information. Remember that whole, wherever my CPU is, I have possession of data even no matter how fleetingly. So I had to go over and I set up a lab, and I lived basically in the Mideast for way too long. all the information we got, we sent up to Paris to be reviewed by a huge army of attorneys and support staff to go through all the discovery requests and then slowly filter it out back to the US. When I left this case, I had been working on it for 2.5 years. It's still going on. This is like year number 5 right now that this is going on. And it's still slowly putting data back and forth. And it's all being done because the US is not happy that they're not getting all the data. Too bad you're not going to get it. This company's not happy that they are facing potentially $1 billion worth of fines. So they're going to fight it until they either hit that point where they said, gee, I spent enough money, I'm going to settle, or everyone gets tired of it and it slowly starts to get eroded away. Already 2 pieces of the case have been overturned by judges in the US. They're down to 1 major piece left. So the guy's strategy is working. This is all because of data movement, using the jurisdictions to your advantage, storing your data where it took place, where it helps you the most, and making sure that you maintain control of your data. And that's it. Hi. Questions, comments, tell me to go home. You know, like I said, this is another one for the attorneys. They love this one. They think it's funny. Oh, yeah, geek. And also the cross-examine the witness. So if anyone has any questions about this, please. If nothing else, thank you all. Appreciate it. Thank you for coming by here and surviving my talk.